Okay, and we are set up in such a way. We see what's going on here. The comp has gotten rather stacked. This dive could work. This dive could work. Yep. As you saw there, Lords let themselves get squished. And once they let themselves get squished and form one straight line like this back and forth, they were doomed. Simon comes around one side, Tracer comes in from the other, Northeastern's backline comes in from the back, and that three-way attack is exactly what we're looking for. So yeah, Caster Temporal pretty much had that right on the spot. As we can see from YouTuber Temporal here, we can see this is this three-directional dive. It was into a bunker comp, a double shield Orisa Sigma comp. It's exactly what we're looking for. And the key to a successful dive, unsurprisingly, is going to be angles and timing. And we saw here, everyone hit simultaneously, everyone hit early before that poke comp was able to wear them down, as that double shield comp does have significantly better poke. Don't want to get caught in the poke stage for any meaningful amount of time. The dive comp has the stronger brawl, and that brawl is further enhanced. The dive team is further weakened by coming in on multiple angles. But let's see how this can go with some other examples. So if we jump over to another one from the same game here, this may look very familiar, but now we are going to see a dive comp going into a brawl comp, which is a little bit differently. And how are we doing on angles? Well, we can see our backline is ready to push in from here. We can see a couple divers ready to come in from a different side here. Maybe not quite as strong from an angle standpoint, but let's see how this goes. Do a quick unpause there. We see that we have our Tracer in the back as well. That helps, gives us the additional angle. Still not quite as strong angle-wise, but what's going on here? They go in. Oh no! Why didn't that work? We had angles. They all hit simultaneously. The backline tried to walk in, tried to push as the divers went in. That should have worked based on what worked in the last one, right? Well, no. Because in the last one, we can see that the dive comp was up against a bunker. Bunkers have that good, strong poke, but are not terribly strong in the brawl phase. This time, they were up against a brawl team. They're looking at that Reinhardt. They're looking at that Mei. They're looking at that Cassidy. These heroes are good at close range. Dive heroes are better than poke heroes at close range, but aren't as strong as the brawl heroes. So how do you get around this? What do you do? Well, you play for the opposite win condition. You take your same strong angles, just like you did against that poke team, but now you want to pressure cook this brawl team down. You want to weaken them a little bit before you go in for that brawl, so that when the brawl happens, you're at better than even odds, as opposed to worse than even odds. Now, the dive team, has a little bit of help from coming in from multiple angles that will make their brawl stronger. It's harder to look in multiple directions. It's harder to shoot outwards, but they needed a pressure cook phase. As we can see here, this was just a, hey, let's go, let's push right in, let's dive, and that's not going to work nearly as effectively against this big, strong, bulky brawl team as it did against that double shield team, that poke team there. So, okay, we either need to weaken up this brawl team before we dive it, or we need to give ourselves more brawl power as a dive team. And one way we could give ourselves more brawl power would be with ults. So if we jump ahead to another team fight here, maybe we'll jump up to this next team fight that we're coming up on here, and let's put ourselves in a place where we can see what's going on here, because this will be another good one. So let's take a look. Let's get set. And we can see that Northeastern is setting up here for another dive, and we can see they're immediately opening with a brawl ult. We can see that the dive team now has Flux, they have EMP, they have Rally. That's 3 brawling ultimates. So if they just used 1 or 2 of these ultimates against a brawl team that didn't have any ults of its own, we'd expect them to be able to win the brawl. Their brawl is now better because they have a Flux going that took away a bunch of health, or an EMP, that sort of thing. So let's take a look at what happened. That Flux goes in there. We've now got some okay angles. Angles started a little weak with our Tracer and Ball over sort of here to the right. Our team, kind of further in front. But we've now deepened our Tracer and our Ball. Maybe they're a little late getting there, or maybe we pulled the trigger on that Flux a little bit early. But hey, now we've got a little bit. That's going to be enough for angles, right? Right? Let's keep watching. There's the EMP. There's the rally. This is all that strong brawl power we were talking about. Wait, why wasn't that enough? We just saw the dive team use Flux, then EMP, then rally, and they didn't win. I mean, they got a Lucio out of it, but then they lost their Tracer. What went wrong? Well, they didn't actually set up strong enough angles this time. I mean, yes, there's the issue of the Brawl team had some Brawl ults that it could try to equalize with at the start of this fight. It had its Sound Barrier available. It had Blizzard available. It was not helpless if we immediately jumped to the Brawl phase with Brawl ults from our dive team. But the bigger issue is that it was able to kite away from these Brawl ults and is now able to push in with its own ults, and it's choosing to commit window here. So weak enough angles, not setting up those proper angles, allowing themselves to be kited was a problem here, as well as, honestly, not softening up this team a little bit, getting some work done there. Could have ultimately skipped that, did have enough Brawl ults to overcome it, but that's really what we're looking at. So, hey, how does this all work? What do we want to know from this? If we jump over with some examples, what you want is your takeaway for how you beat everything as dive, how you beat each thing as dive might be a better way to phrase this, is you look, you see what you're up against. If you were up against some sort of poke-heavy comp, maybe an Orisa comp like you guys can see on screen here, like we saw in the first example, you want to take angles, and then after you've taken those angles, you do not want to poke phase. You do not want to spend lots of time trading resources. You want to recover resources behind cover, stabilize, that sort of thing, and then you quickly want to go in simultaneously with everyone. If you do that, you will be more powerful than the poke team in their brawl phase. You still want to come in from angles. You do not want to have some one-directional, yes, our backline and our divers all come from straight ahead of the poke team or from two different directions on the poke team. Hint, double shield teams are really good at holding down two different lanes. So you really do need that three-directional push into them, and you want to take it before resource trades get serious. You do not want to have this extended poke phase against a poke team there, against a double shield team. But it's actually the opposite when you're playing up against a brawl team. So if we set this up here, and we'll go over to second, since we saw a brawl fight example there, and we can set up, maybe we'll set up like this, set up what we saw in this third fight here, our third example. And what we're going to want to do is we can do something very similar where we can go, hey, we still have our backline ready to push in. We might have maybe a ball over on the right ready to come in, but then we're going to have something locking them down from another angle. We've got to have something going on locking these guys down from a third angle here. We want to have these angles early, and what we actually need to do is we need to pressure cook this brawl team a bit. We need to put some pressure on them, make them spend some resources. So that's going to be poke them, get some resources out. Maybe you get a lamp out of them. Maybe you wear down some Rhine Shield, force out an amp heal, maybe spend some DM or a Maywall, and then you don't need to fully get a pick. You don't need to be like, yes, they spent beat, though that would be great, but you do need to wear them down on some resources, get them a little bit weaker, so that then when you pull the trigger, because you don't just try to poke them down from 100 to 0 either, you're not going to be able to do that, especially if you're using heroes like Sombra and Tracer. Then once you've worn them down a little, then you commit all together and take them out. And I have to warn you, this is a hard thing for teams to get right, because you've got to be able to play at two different paces for the different types of teams that you're going into. As you saw here in the example, this dive team was perfectly happy at that fast pace to go into fights against bunker teams, but they weren't then good at slowing it down, getting that pressure cook from the surround to take them out in this particular match. So that's what you're really looking at. Get your angles, no matter what you're playing against. Get your surround against the bunkers, against the brawls, whatever. Pressure cook them if they're on brawl until you think you're equal or better to them in a brawl, and then dive, and your angles will still help you, coming in from three different ones there. And then against those heavy poke teams, those Orisa teams, you want to go ahead and set you up your angles and then immediately dive. You don't want that poke phase. They're too likely to get a pick. You're just not strong enough in the poke phase, and you're already strong enough to beat them in the brawl. Now, of course, there are variations. I've put a few up here on screen. You might see double shield teams swap out their Orisa for a Diva. Maybe they'll swap out something like a Hanzo for a McCree, things like that, or maybe for a Tracer, take your pick. Those sorts of things will absolutely harden up a team and make it more weird for you as a team to dive into them when they are set up as a double shield team. But ultimately, you still look at it and go, is it better at poke? Or is it better at brawl? And if it's still better at poke than brawl, you're still going to look at it and go, we want to go in here pretty darn quickly to take it out. Or if a brawl team starts going, hey, we're going to start putting in more poke elements, does it get weak enough that you handle it the other way? The last thing that I would mention is that these shield teams, these poke teams, can get more complicated. They've actually got a fair bit of ability to, for example, mix in, say, a Roadhog. Maybe they go Orisa Roadhog or Sigma Roadhog, something like that. Or maybe they play split. Their Roadhog plays super split. Or maybe they have a Soldier or a Torp or something that plays, or a Reaper, a Doomfist, something that plays super split from them. That is perfectly fine. All you do in that situation is you first take your angles as the dive team around the independent element or around the smaller bunker if they're playing in two different bunkers. You pressure that group. You don't need to hard dive it necessarily, but you pressure that group to rejoin the main bunker. Maybe that's a Reaper having to Wraith back. Maybe that's a Roadhog trying to pop Breather and walk back. Maybe that's a Sigma plus Brig having to walk back to the Orisa. Whatever the case may be, you pressure them to leave as your dive group. Again, not yet committing on anyone, and then once they're together, you immediately hit that commit, wipe them out, and take down that team. So definitely can get some extra steps against some of these bunker teams that really try to harden themselves against dive. You'll hear some people referring to like, oh, this is anti-dive, this is the counter to dive. If you play a Orisa comp with a Diva and a Brig and a Torb or something like that, no, it can add some extra steps, but ultimately very handleable. So that's what I wanted to cover today. If you guys have any questions, you can certainly let me know. If you're enjoying this type of content, please do drop a like, consider subscribing if you haven't already done so, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks. Temporal out.